Hey guys, tonight we travel somewhere very dry, very sunny and very shadowy. You wake up in the sand-soft hush of ancient Egypt, somewhere between 1500 and 1000 BCE, blinking at the blinding white sky. There's no Wi-Fi, no espresso machine, and not a single notification ping to be heard. Just the hot breath of the desert and the whisper of wind against stone. But somehow, despite the lack of smartwatches or alarm clocks, people here know exactly what time it is. And the secret? It's a stick in the ground throwing shade. Yes, tonight we're letting shadows tell time. Welcome to the subtly thrilling, strangely soothing world of early Egyptian timekeeping, where the sun was your boss, your planner, and your sometimes unreliable co-worker. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stretch your arms, sore, from sleeping on what felt like a pillow made of woven reeds, and glance at the courtyard outside. There on the compact dirt stands a tall, straight stick, planted like a flag in the earth. Around it, nothing. No ropes, no markings. Just one solitary object, casting a very serious shadow. A local child, barefoot and grinning, points to a stick and says something that sounds like, "The day's already half over." You blink. How does she know that? Turns out you're looking at one of the simplest timekeeping devices in history, the shadow stick, or gnomon. Just a rod and the sun. When the sun moves, the shadow moves. It's that basic, and it's also kind of genius. You walk toward it. The shadow is long and thin, pointing like an accusing finger toward the outer wall. There are no numbers, no chimes, no beep beep, time to stand up. But the locals seem perfectly confident in reading this silent, slow-ticking clock. Here's the thing. In ancient Egypt, the day was divided, not into minutes and seconds, but into proportional hours, 12 parts of daylight, 12 of night. That meant summer days had long hours and short nights, and winter was the opposite, which is perfect because when it's 45 degrees, you want the day to be over quickly. You notice the stick is actually part of a larger pattern. A nearby wall has faint carvings, little marks, notches, and even a crude diagram of the sun in its arc. Someone's been mapping the journey of the shadow. Historians still debate whether these early layouts were purely observational, or if they reflected mathematical attempts to predict solar position. Either way, it's a lot of staring at the ground and making educated guesses. Kind of like your last group project in school, the shadow at midday is shortest, nearly invisible under the stick. Locals call this the 0 hour. From there, it grows again in the opposite direction, marking the descent of the sun and the slow return of cooler air. You think of your own life. Meetings, alarms, endless ping reminders. Here, people just watch. The elderly man who tends the nearby fig trees wanders over and points to the shadow. He's got a kind of weathered serenity, and he murmurs something that loosely translates to, "You don't rush the sun." His name is Nefer, and he's been reading this stick for 40 years. He tells you, well, gestures really, that when he was a boy, his mother could guess the time within 10 minutes, just by looking at the way shadows crept across their garden. Of course, this system has its flaws. 1, you need the sun. 2, you need something that casts a straight shadow. And 3, you need to actually be paying attention. That last part seems like the hardest in the modern world. Still, there's something comforting about it. No buzzing, no blinking. Just light and shape, day after day. One curious little twist. Sometimes they used multiple sticks at once. Different times of day, different sticks. It's the ancient equivalent of having both a phone alarm and a microwave clock. Redundancy, but make it sandy. And these weren't just random tools. Priests in particular used time sticks to coordinate rituals precisely. You don't want to start a festival 2 shadows early. It could anger the gods, or worse, confuse the cattle. You step back and notice your own shadow, long now stretching eastward, mirroring the one by the stick. You line yourself up with it. For a moment it feels like you're part of the sundial. You are the sundial. Nefer chuckles. Later, while resting under the date palms, You spot a group of students learning from a teacher using a miniature version of the shadow stick. Each child has a flat clay disc, a tiny peg in the center, and a curious squint on their face. They're practicing measuring time by watching. No tablets, no styluses, well, not that kind. You ask the teacher through broken gestures if the children find it easy. She shrugs. They'll get it by the time they're 12. You think about how long it took you to read an analog, Satlock. Maybe this isn't so different after all. As the sky begins to change hue, from bright sand yellow to the rose gold of evening, you realize you've spent the entire day watching a stick cast shadows, and somehow you feel good, relaxed, like your heartbeat has synced to something ancient, something slow, something bigger than notifications and countdowns. As Nefer packs up his tools and waves goodbye, the shadow finally disappears into the dusk. You're up early again, because apparently that's what people do here. Wake with the sun, sleep with the moon, no debates. The desert doesn't care if you're a night owl, it just bakes you evenly at dawn. You rub your eyes and wander out, into the sandy courtyard where the shadows are already doing their elegant morning dance. Today you're spending time with a man named Misi, a junior scribe in Thebes who manages his schedule with, well, sunlight. He's meticulous, always a few steps ahead of his duties, and has the posture of someone who's memorized a lot of lists. He carries a reed pen tucked behind his ear and a piece of polished limestone under his arm, which serves as his notepad. Misi greets you with a nod and offers you a seat on a low stone bench that is, of course, facing the east so the sun can hit your face directly. It's like the universe's way of saying, wake up already. You follow Misi through his morning routine, which begins by examining the angle of the light. His home has a carefully placed window slit that lets a beam of sunlight fall along the floor. That line of light moves through the day, first touching the corner of the storage box, then slowly reaching the family altar by midday. It's a homegrown clock, elegant in its silence. The moment the beam hits a certain crack in the wall, Macy puts down his bread, barley, dry, no toppings, and begins preparing his tablet for work. That crack? His personal 8:1 a.m. Not universal, not standardized, but it works. Sort of. Historians still discuss whether Egyptians used consistent hour lengths across professions. Some scholars argue that temple hours and laborer hours could differ, shaped by context and importance. After all, a farmer needs sunlight, a priest needs precision. There's ongoing debate whether Macy's version of noon is the same. As the guy hauling mud bricks outside, you suspect not still. To Macy, the routine is sacred. He tells you, between spoonfuls of what looks like lukewarm lentil mash, that his uncle once got a stern warning from a supervisor because he arrived after the shadow crossed the edge of the well. That's a very specific kind of late. Try using that excuse on your boss. As you tag along with him to the scribe's office, you notice the shadows of pillars stretching across the floor like long, tired fingers. Misi explains casually that they built the courtyard to allow full sun tracking. Pillars not just as decoration, but time indicators. When the fourth pillar's shadow hits the papyrus basket, he says, that's when we begin reviewing tax receipts. You laugh, not because it's funny, but because it sounds like a curse, and yet there's beauty in the logic. The sun dictates everything. It's not about controlling time, it's about aligning with it. You spend the day noticing how deeply synchronized life here is with the sun's movement. Kids are called in from play when the tree's shadow reaches the goat pen. Fishermen push off when the shadow of the dock lines up with the water pot. There are no arguments about what time it is. Time is what the sun says it is. In the mid-afternoon, the temperature rises sharply, and the whole city seems to fold inward. People retreat into shade. Even the animals get quieter. You find a patch of cool beside a stone wall and observe how its shadow creeps across the sand, stretching lazily like a cat. It's like the wall is slowly exhaling the day. You think about how back home you'd be glued to a screen, counting down minutes in meetings, watching timers tick backward. Here time doesn't count down. It just is. And it's always moving forward, whether you're ready or not. Macy shows you another clever trick. In the temple library, there's a flat polished slab with small chiseled grooves. each one spaced for a certain shadow length. When the sun hits the slab just right, a stick laid across it can tell you whether it's time for prayer, for silence, or for copying scrolls. It's a shadow reader, passed down between scribes. Not every household had one. It's more of an upper-tier scribal thing. But still, it's amazing how exact a civilization can get with just light and patience. There's a small but wonderful detail. Macy sometimes leaves a fig at the corner of the slab as a snack marker. When the shadow hits the fig, he says, I eat. You tell him it's a very low-tech alarm clock. He doesn't get the joke, but he does eat the fig with excellent timing. Near sunset, the long shadows make the city look bigger, more dramatic. Doorways are swallowed in golden light and every face seems carved from stone. Messi finishes his final record and sighs. The shadows pass the shrine, he murmurs. Time to go. On the way back, you catch a glimpse of something oddly modern. Chalk lines drawn along the courtyard floor, perhaps from a recent experiment in measuring shadow angles more accurately. Misi waves it off. The new apprentice wants to prove he can tell time better than the priests. He chuckles. Good luck. As you sit down again at the edge of the courtyard, the same shadow stick from yesterday, now barely visible in the twilight, you feel a strange satisfaction, like you've slipped into a rhythm that isn't yours but is still right. Time here isn't something you chase. It walks beside you, casting shadows, not pressure. The air is dry again, with that early morning bite that quickly vanishes once the sun settles in. You've slept well, maybe too well, because by the time you shuffle out into the light, the first birds are already bickering in the palms, and Macy is long gone, but the stick is still there. Its shadow is already creeping to the west, like a polite but insistent reminder that the day is underway. Today you're following another local, a man with thick arms and thicker eyebrows named Para. He's not a scribe, he's a worker, responsible for maintaining the temple grounds and making sure the water jars don't mysteriously disappear. He doesn't track time with cracked walls or polished stones. No, Para trusts a baston de sombra, a shadow staff laid across a marked wooden board. The contraption looks like something between a garden rake and a teacher's pointer. He plants the base of it firmly into a mound of compacted earth, then lays the narrow end across a slightly curved surface with faint lines etched into it. He squints, adjusts, nods. You have no idea what just happened, but he's confident it's mid-morning. The staff, also known in some periods as a merket, is one of the earliest time-telling devices that attempts something like standardization. Their horizontal staff with a vertical gnomon, the upright stick part, paired with a plumb line and celestial alignment. Fancy for a guy in a linen kilt and dusty feet, but effective. This isn't just eyeballing a shadow anymore. It's engineering with sunbeams. The merket was especially popular among priests and astronomers, who used it not only to mark daily hours, but to track the stars at night. Para is neither of those, but he picked up the basics during a temple apprenticeship. His version is homemade, scratched wood, uneven lines, and something that might be an old spoon repurposed as a leveler. Not perfect, he says with a shrug, but good enough to know when it's time to feed the goats. You try your hand at it. The trick, Para explains, is in shadow alignment. When the upright stick casts a shadow that matches a certain groove, that's your cue. Time for prayer, time to eat, time to herd. It's not about counting minutes, it's about meeting the sun where it is. This system, though primitive to us now, was a big leap forward from guessing by feel. Egyptian engineers had figured out slowly and with remarkable care that shadows fall in predictable patterns. The angle of the sun at certain times of year changes, but locally it's consistent enough to plan around. Over time they created sets of lines for different seasons, an early example of adaptive technology. And then there's the issue of location. As Para moves his staff to a new angle to chase the light, you realize something. These systems weren't portable. They were fixed to place and purpose. What worked at the temple wouldn't work at the docks, so everyone had their own variation. Not exactly the atomic clock, but hey, at least no one's phone battery dies. Historians argue over who had access to these tools. Were they widespread or reserved for elites? Some believe that only priests and administrators regularly used merkets, while others argue for a more community-based understanding of time. In other words, there's no consensus, just like now, when nobody can agree if it's okay to show up 5 minutes late. Para, meanwhile, checks the shadow again and grins. Close to midday, he says. Want to see something dumb? Of course you do. He takes you behind a storage hut where an old stick, warped and cracked, is planted in the sand. It's surrounded by 3 rings of rocks, one inside the other. This was my uncle's system, he laughs. He said when the shadow touched the second circle, it was time to hide from his wife. You make a note, ancient Egypt, advanced. In architecture, lacking in subtlety. Later in the day, you join a small crew of temple workers organizing supplies. They're not looking at clocks. Instead, the shadow's length is being used to pace the work. If the shadow from the central column reaches the edge of the stone basin, it's time to switch tasks. You watch as someone literally lays down his broom mid-sweep because the shadow moved an inch. Bureaucracy runs deep. One of the workers pulls you aside to show a peculiar quirk. In winter, their shadow time gets compressed. The sun is lower, shadows are longer all day, and tasks have to be adjusted accordingly. No 9 to 5 here, more like sunrise to second shadow mark depending on the season. They even have a nickname for this period, O tempo preguisoso, the lazy time. Not because people were lazy, but because the light was. The sun just didn't feel like climbing as high, and you had to respect that mood. You start to notice just how many surfaces in this place are shaped to receive sunlight. Not just windows, but walls angled to catch the morning rays. Floors arranged for consistent shadows. It's like the whole environment is a giant, passive timekeeper, whispering the hour if you just slow down enough to listen. By the end of the day, Para is sipping beer under a date palm, watching the last gold edge of sunlight slide off his staff. That's it, he says. Work's done. No bell, no countdown, just shadow. You stretch your legs, feel the coolness settling back into the stone beneath you, and glance again at the stick in the courtyard. Still there, still watching time for you. By now you've accepted that here, shadows are smarter than most people you know. They show up every day, never make noise, and never ask for a raise. You wake up with the sun again, and the stick in the courtyard greets you like an old friend, still upright, still casting judgmental lines across the dust. Today you're heading toward the grand temple complex just beyond the city. It's the kind of place that humbles even the cockiest of sandals. Giant columns, painted ceilings, courtyards so vast they echo like caves, and all of it built with perfect solar alignment. The priests here aren't just spiritual leaders. They're sun technicians, masters of time by shadow. Your guide for the day is Hinenu, a temple assistant who spends most of his time hauling water and watching senior priests track time with the grace and intensity of a chess grandmaster. He gestures for you to follow him into the central courtyard, where something truly impressive happens. In the middle of the courtyard stands a stone pillar, tall and narrow, its base surrounded by a flat, smooth floor inlaid with thin lines, like a starburst frozen in rock. This, Hinenu tells you, is a solar calendar floor, used by temple priests to observe sacred hours. As the sun rises, the shadow of the pillar sweeps across these inlaid lines like the arm of a clock, marking key points in the day. Time for prayers, time for incense, time to absolutely not touch the sacred ibis eggs. As you stand there watching the shadow's tip slowly inch across a golden line, you can feel the gravity of it. These people didn't just observe the sun, they choreographed their entire lives around it. Rites had to be performed at the correct shadow, not a minute before, not a minute after. Because in the Egyptian mind, cosmic harmony depended on alignment. The sun moved with purpose and humans had to keep pace. Hinenu leads you into a smaller side chamber where you see something unusual. A portable sundial carved into stone. It looks like a chunk of a very confused pie with segments marked, and a small L-shaped rod for casting shadows. Apparently the priests used this when traveling between temples, or when showing off at festivals. The sundial, like the Merket, depended on sunlight, but it offered a more user-friendly interface. You could carry it, sort of, reposition it, And if you lined it up correctly with the east-west axis, it actually worked pretty well. Though, as Hinenu admits, it only tells you time when the sun is in a good mood. You step outside again just in time to hear a gong sound from a side altar. No, not a real gong, just a copper bowl being struck by a priest. But the effect is there. It's time for the midday cleansing ritual. The reason they know this? The pillar's shadow just touched the sixth groove. Hinenu raises an eyebrow, as if to say, see what I mean? Historians are still puzzling over how widespread these precise solar systems were. Some argue that only the top-tier temples had floors this elaborate. Others believe simpler versions were common in regional shrines. The truth might lie in between. Egypt was vast, and shadows fall everywhere. You wander deeper into the temple complex, where every corner has a purpose. Some hallways are aligned with the solstice sunrise, others with particular stars. In one alcove, you see a faded wall carving of a sundial paired with an offering list: bread, beer, and honey cakes. It's unclear if the sundial was part of the recipe or just the kitchen timer, but your favorite discovery of the day is in the priest's study, a place that smells like ink and old sandals. Here, scratched into the side of a storage cabinet, is a graffito of a man asleep next to a sundial. The caption, which Hinenu reads aloud with a grin, says, "He missed the shadow. He missed lunch." You feel a deep, personal connection to this ancient meme. As the sun begins to lower again, the pillar's shadow stretches long across the floor. You sit on the edge, watching the darkness move like liquid over stone. Hinenu joins you and says, "The shadow is wise. It doesn't rush." It's a good point. You ask him if people ever argued about the time. Say, if one priest thought the shadow hit the mark too early. He smiles. Yes, then we blame the sun or the floor or the other priest. Some things, it seems, never change. Before you leave, Hinenu hands you a small clay tablet. On it is a simple etched arc with a notch in the center. For your own shadow, he says, if you ever forget the time, just check your feet. You walk back through the city as the sunlight starts to fade, noticing how many doorways are built to catch that last perfect angle of gold. It's like the buildings are bowing toward the sun, saying thank you for the day. And as always, the stick in your courtyard waits for you, still upright, still quietly counting. The morning comes with a breeze today, which feels like a gift. The sand outside your doorway is cooler than usual, and the familiar shadow stick is already pulling its line toward the west. You stretch, breathe in the scent of old earth and baking brick, and begin your walk toward the granaries, where another kind of timekeeping is in motion. This one involving food, patience, and beer. Today's guide is a woman named Horia, who oversees a small crew of temple workers tasked with preparing offerings, bread, onions, beer, for a festival later in the week. She is brisk, serious, and has the sharp eyes of someone who could probably spot a crooked shadow at 50 paces. You watch as she lays out her tools: stone jars, barley paste, a long stirring rod, and most importantly, a flat platform with a standing stick. Not unlike your trusty courtyard friend, but in this case it's used specifically to time the brewing process. Yes, brewing by shadow. You've entered the world of solar synchronized fermentation. You settle down beside her in the courtyard, where workers are mashing barley, shaping dough, and lighting low fires beneath ceramic ovens. Horia explains, without pausing her brisk hand motions, that the brewing schedule depends entirely on the position of the sun. The mash must sit for 2 shadow lengths, then be stirred when the tip reaches the chalk-marked edge of a pottery shard. If you stir too early, it's sour. Too late, and it's sludge. You start to realize just how deeply embedded timekeeping is in the culinary life of the Egyptians. This isn't just ritual, it's practical. Food takes time, and time here comes from the sun. The priests, Horia, tells you, often insist that offerings be prepared exactly when the sun hits a certain angle. The gods are picky, she mutters, half joking. Or maybe the priests are. Either way, the bread has to rise before the shadow gets too long. You peek at a nearby platform where several loaves are lined up like sunbathers. Each is angled toward the light, carefully rotated at intervals, like a pastry calendar made of dough. It's oddly charming, and the smell is even better. According to Horaya, different parts of the temple used different sticks and markers depending on what was being prepared. One priest might call for offerings at the third finger of shadow, while another preferred after the sun passes the goat shelter. The terminology wasn't exactly ISO certified. Historians still debate whether these measurements were standardized or personalized. Some scholars believe temples had agreed upon shadow systems, while others think each kitchen developed its own time-tracking rituals. The evidence? Inconsistent, much like trying to find matching Tupperware lids 3,000 years later. In the heat of the day, Horaya lets you rest in the shade of the grain storehouse where cool jars line the walls. She shares a secret. Sometimes when clouds make the shadow fade or flicker, the workers simply guess. "You fake it with confidence," she says, "just like my cousin pretends to know when to flip flatbread." You laugh, and she tells you about a failed batch last year. Clouds rolled in during the mashing stage, and the beer turned out bitter. We called it sunless ale. Only the goats liked it. Later, you help move a large pot of thickened mash closer to the light, setting it under a carefully measured stick embedded in the stone floor. The shadow is short now, almost perfectly vertical. Horaya nods. Now we wait. The sun does what it always does. It moves with no regard for your impatience, but you're starting to like that. No timer buzzes, no one yells "time's up." The shadow shortens, then lengthens again, until it kisses a scratch in the floor that Horaya calls the sweet spot. That's when the workers swarm. They stir, strain, and store the beer into cool jars, all in a rhythm as smooth as any assembly line. Except here it's driven by the light. The shadow choreography of the day. Before leaving, you're offered a taste of the finished product. It's thick, slightly sour, and has a gritty texture that surprises you. But it's surprisingly good. Strong enough to make you forget what hour it is, Horaya winks, which is funny because we just spent all day measuring it. On your walk home, you think about how food and time are woven together. In your world, recipes come with oven timers and beeping devices. Here they come with sky and shadow. There's no hurrying it. You can't fast forward the sun, you just have to wait and trust that your stick knows what it's doing. The courtyard is quiet now. The stick stands calmly. Its shadow stretches, long and thin toward the eastern wall. The light is softening, turning honey-colored. You realize it's been telling you the day is almost done, and it's been right all along. The morning light slants a little differently today. You notice it right away, not because you're a solar expert now, though that's debatable, but because the courtyard feels cooler, the light a bit more muted. Maybe the seasons are shifting, or maybe the sun's just in one of its moods. Either way, your trusty stick still stands, and the shadow starts its daily stretch like a cat after a nap. Today, you're traveling beyond the heart of the city to the outer edge of a construction site. Not just any construction site, a tomb in progress. You're here to learn how builders, stonecutters, and surveyors measure time when they're surrounded by rock, dust, and echoing chisels instead of temple floors and bakery ovens. Your companion for the day is a man named Nebnetcha, a foreman with a sunburnt nose and the permanent squint of someone who stares at light-reflective limestone all day. He greets you with a grunt, then points to a spot on the ground where a single upright stick is planted into a pile of white pebbles. No markings, no lines, just intuition and habit. You watch the edge, he says, not the middle. Apparently, on this site, the sun is a foreman too. The entire workday is scheduled around the movement of the sun across the valley. There are 3 major shadow moments the crew observes. When the shadow clears the southern marker, start work. When it touches the edge of the scaffolding, break time. And when it reaches the tool hut, stop work before someone faints. There are no bells, no whistles. Just the silent governance of shadows crawling over stone. You tag along as Nebnetcha shows you a more advanced feature, a carved time grid etched into a block near the scaffold base. It looks like a flattened grid of boxes, almost like a crude spreadsheet. Each box represents a span of shadow movement, roughly 1 hour in summer, a little more in winter. When the stick's shadow lines up with a new box, it's time to change tasks or take note of progress. One of the apprentices explains, that they sometimes track stone transport stages this way. For example, move the block from the quarry to the site in 3 shadow boxes or less. It's the most ancient project management system you've ever seen. Historians still argue about how standardized these building schedules were. Some suggest each site developed its own shadow system based on geography and layout. Others believe scribes were dispatched to ensure timekeeping consistency between major sites. There's even a theory that tomb orientation itself, especially for elite burials, was planned with shadow time in mind. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't care much for debates. He cares about not getting crushed by falling lintels. Shadow says rest. He says, so we rest. Around midday, the light becomes harsh and flat. The shadows retreat under ledges, disappearing altogether in some places. During this time, the crew huddles in the shade, sipping sour beer from clay mugs and chewing on dry onions. You do the same, sitting with your back against a large, partially carved obelisk. A young worker shows you a game. He balances a short stick upright on a flat surface and tries to guess where the shadow will fall in 5 minutes. It's like watching someone play chess against the sun. You try it. You are not good at this game. As the sun starts descending again, the shadows reappear, longer, sharper, cooler. The work resumes, and you begin to notice how the angle of the sun transforms the entire landscape. What was flat becomes textured. What was blinding becomes golden. You walk with Nebuchadnezzar to a partially complete corridor where an assistant is checking shadow length against engraved guide marks on the stone floor. This section, destined for a high-ranking official, is aligned so that on a particular day, possibly the official's birth or death date, the morning sun will shine directly into the corridor and cast a shadow perfectly down the center line. You feel suddenly very small. You also feel a bit amused when Nebuchadnezzar shrugs and says, he paid extra for that. Your final stop is a shaded work tent where older craftsmen sit filing smaller stones. One of them, a man with more wrinkles than linen, explains a superstition. If your chisel breaks just as the shadow reaches your foot, it means you'll get a promotion soon, or a terrible back injury. Interpretations vary. By the end of the afternoon, the air cools again and the long shadow of the scaffold touches the pebble pile by the marker stick. Nebuchadnezzar calls it, that's the day. You look back as you walk away, noticing how many sticks, some sturdy, some crooked, stand poking from stone piles all across the site. A quiet forest of timekeepers, each one pulling their line of light across the dust. When you return to your courtyard, the light is pale and soft, the shadow stick now casting a long, tired arm against the wall. You watch it for a moment, knowing now just how much labor, planning, and precision has ridden on shadows just like this one. Still upright, still watching. This morning arrives with a warm breeze and a sky so blue it almost feels like a special occasion. The courtyard glows softly in the early sun, and your old friend, the shadow stick, is already casting its first mark across the hard-packed earth. You give it a respectful nod. It's been doing this longer than you've been alive, after all. Today, your path leads away from temples and construction sites and into the daily life of farmers who live near the banks of the Nile. You're walking with a man named Kay, who has a sun-beaten face, hands like tree bark, and a deeply relaxed attitude about absolutely everything except the price of onions. Kay doesn't have fancy markers or stone grids. His tools are simple: a stick in the ground, a few lines scratched in the dirt, and, most impressively, his memory. He claims to know within the space of a half-finger of shadow when it's time to plant, harvest, break for lunch, or stop before his son starts whining. He leads you to a spot between 2 sycamore trees where a smooth patch of earth lies waiting. He plants a short reed into a lump of clay and nods. Now we see how lazy the sun is today. The first-time marker is already visible, a notch he made in the dirt just after the flood season ended. The Nile has receded, the soil is dark and rich, and Kay's job today is to prepare furrows for planting. The shadow reaches its first line. That means start digging. The simplicity is deceptive. Over generations, Kay's family has learned to use shadow memory to manage farm work. They've mapped the days when the shadow falls at just the right angle to start planting onions versus barley. They know how much light the garlic likes, They can predict when to rotate the goats based on the length of the goat's own shadow. Yes, that's a real method, apparently. Goat shadows too long? Move 'em, Kay says with a shrug. Historians have only fragments of how much the average Egyptian farmer depended on solar time. Some records suggest that lunar calendars were used for agriculture, while others point to localized solar practices like Kay's, where families adapted sun positions based on micro-regional climates and landmarks. There's little consensus, but you get the feeling Kay would roll his eyes at historians and say, "Just look at the stick." You watch as Kay's young daughter, little more than a walking bundle of linen, toddles over to a patch of dirt with her own tiny stick and tries to measure a beetle's shadow. She declares it almost snack time. Kay grins. Close enough. Later in the day, as the sun climbs higher, the work slows. The soil is hot to the touch, and Kay shifts into his midday routine, flip his tunic, drink from a cool jug, and lie under the sycamore for a bit. You lie beside him and trace the shrinking shadow of the stick. He tells you stories of his grandfather, who used the top of a nearby statue's head to know when to rotate the compost heap. Smelled worse than the shadow could fix, he adds. 1. Of the most charming details you learn is the idea of the resting shadow. It's the moment, sometime between late morning and early afternoon, when the shadow of a fixed marker stops moving noticeably for a brief window, just a pause in the dance. That's when Kay insists everyone takes a proper rest. The sun blinks, we blink, he says, as if that's obvious. There's also a local saying you hear repeated around the village. If the cow's shadow disappears, you're already late. No one explains what you're late for. Just late. It's oddly effective. As the sun begins to lower, you walk with Kay toward a granary. He points to the outer wall, where lines have been carved in descending order, each marked with a symbol. A leaf, a fish, a loaf, a jug. These are seasonal. Shadow markers used to track how early or late the sun sets throughout the planting months. When the shadow hits the loaf, it's time to store grain. When it hits the jug, start pressing dates. You ask how they remember all this. He shrugs. You live with the sun long enough. You stop asking for permission. As you leave, he presses a small clay token into your palm. It's shaped like a leaf with a line scratched across it. Shadow line, he says, for luck. Back at your courtyard, the shadow stick stretches again, now reaching the spot where ants like to gather in the evening. You sit beside it, watching the sky shift from blue to something softer. You realize that the more you learn about these shadows, the less you worry about time in the modern sense. Here, the sun isn't something you beat. It's something you join, and that feels just right. Today's sunlight feels softer, like it's been filtered through a veil of ancient patience. The courtyard is peaceful, the shadow stick casting a thin, precise line across the ground. You notice how the shadow's edge seems less sharp than before, almost like the sun is taking its time. A slow exhale in the heat. You're invited to visit a modest but lively village where artisans craft the everyday objects that fill Egyptian homes: pottery, baskets, woven mats. Your guide, a potter named Tanu, is a cheerful woman with clay-streaked hands and a laugh that feels like water over smooth stones. Tanu's workshop is tucked under a canopy of palm fronds, with sun-dappled light playing on her wheel and the rows of drying pots. But here time is measured not just by shadow sticks, but also by the changing colors of fired clay as it cools, an unusual complement to the sun's silent clock. As you sit on a low stool, Tanu points to a simple stick anchored in the dirt, near her kiln. "This shadow tells me when to check the pots," she says. "If I open the kiln too early, the pots crack. Too late, and they're too brittle." You watch the shadow creep steadily forward as she prepares her tools, brushes for glazing smoothing stones, and a wooden paddle for shaping wet clay. She tells you the kiln is built so that the sun's position helps regulate temperature indirectly. During certain hours, the kiln absorbs just the right amount of heat, and the shadow's position warns her when to adjust the airflow. It's an elegant dance, this balancing act of fire, clay, and sunlight. You notice the pots themselves bear small marks, tiny carved grooves and painted lines that aren't just decorative. Tanu explains they're part of an ancient system of timing and quality control. The marks correspond to the length of shadows on particular days. indicating when a pot was fired or who made it. Historians still debate the extent to which these marks served as a calendar or a signature. Some argue they were purely functional, while others see them as early branding or even a kind of artisan's diary. Tanu laughs softly and shares a curious tale from her grandmother about a potter who tried to cheat the shadow's timing by covering the kiln with palm leaves. "The pots exploded," she says with mock seriousness. "Shadow knows your tricks." The afternoon drifts by with the steady ticking of shadow and sun. You help shape a small bowl, your fingers tracing the cool, damp clay. The breeze carries the faint scent of date palms and fresh earth. As the shadow nears a carved notch in the courtyard stone floor, Tanu signals it's time to check the kiln. She opens the door with a practiced hand, revealing rows of perfectly baked pots warm to the touch. You realize that for these artisans, timekeeping is not about precision to the second, but about harmony, working with the rhythm of nature and the light rather than against it. Before you leave, Tanu presses a tiny clay figurine into your hand, a small cat with delicate whiskers. "For patience," she says, "and for the shadow to guide you." Walking back, you consider how much care goes into each object, the pots, the baskets, the mats, all touched by sunlight, shadow, and hands that understand the slow flow of time. Your shadow stick waits quietly as evening falls, stretching long and lazy across the cool earth. The sun dips behind the distant hills, and you feel for a moment perfectly in sync with the ancient pulse of this land. The morning light filters gently through the canopy of date palms, casting mottled shadows that flicker like whispers across the courtyard floor. Your shadow stick stands stoic and familiar, its slender form a silent companion to your journey through ancient timekeeping. Today you follow a scholar named Mary, who's fascinated by the ways that ancient Egyptians used shadows not just for daily timekeeping, but for marking religious rituals and festivals. Mary's eyes sparkle with quiet enthusiasm as she explains how certain temples were oriented precisely to align with the sun's shadows on key dates. She leads you to the Temple of Karnak, a sprawling complex filled with towering columns that seem to reach for the heavens. The air hums softly with the memories of chants and incense, and you can almost hear the faint echoes of priests guiding their shadows through sacred cycles. Mary points to an ancient obelisk, standing tall and slender, in the temple's central courtyard. On the summer solstice, she says, the shadow disappears entirely at noon, an event seen as the god Ra's full embrace. You watch, mesmerized, as the morning shadow crawls steadily up the obelisk's base, thinning until it almost vanishes at midday. There's a curious hush to this moment, as if the temple itself is holding its breath. Religious scholars still debate whether these shadow events were planned as public ceremonies or secret priestly knowledge. Some argue the shadow alignments were carefully engineered to impress and reassure the populace, while others suggest they were practical markers for agricultural cycles, cloaked in divine symbolism. Mary shares a lesser-known story about how pharaohs' crowns were sometimes designed to cast specific shadows during important rituals. She says, "Imagine wearing a crown that turns you into a walking sundial. Talk about wearable tech, right?" As the shadow lengthens again after noon, you're led to a small shrine tucked behind the main temple. Here the light filters softly through carved stone latticework, casting delicate patterns that shift with the sun's slow journey. Mary kneels beside a set of faded inscriptions detailing shadow observations connected to the festival of Opet, a celebration renewing the pharaoh's divine power. The text describes how priests timed the release of incense and offerings by the length and angle of shadow lines cast across altar stones. You lean closer, feeling the coolness of the stone beneath your hands. The slow movement of shadow here feels like a gentle heartbeat, pulsing with an ancient rhythm that has echoed for thousands of years. Later, as you wander through the bustling market outside the temple walls, you notice small shadow sticks sold, alongside beads and spices, reminders of the quiet, invisible measures that shape life and faith alike. As evening descends, you return to your courtyard and watch your own shadow stick stretch its length with the fading light. You feel a peaceful connection to those ancient priests, artisans, and farmers who relied on these silent guides. In this shared understanding, the past feels just a little less distant and the slow, steady dance of shadows a timeless companion. For your own quiet moments, the sunlight this morning is soft, filtered through a haze that makes the courtyard feel like it's wrapped in a gentle veil. Your shadow stick stands tall, its slender silhouette stretching patiently across the ground, as if waiting for you to catch up. Today, you're journeying into the world of ancient Egyptian medicine, where time was not only measured by shadows, but also carefully tied to healing rituals and remedies. Your guide is a healer named Anpu, whose calm demeanor and steady hands make you feel instantly at ease. Anpu leads you into a cool, shaded room filled with jars of herbs, dried flowers, and strange little tools you've only read about in dusty manuscripts. He explains that healing was considered a delicate balance between the body, the spirit, and the natural rhythms of the sun and moon. On a small wooden table, a shadow stick stands beside a finely carved bowl of water. Anpu shows you how he uses the movement of shadows to time the preparation of medicinal infusions and poultices. Too little sun, and the medicine is weak. Too much, and it's bitter, he says with a faint smile. You watch as he sets a mixture of herbs to soak, marking the starting shadow with a careful line drawn in the clay pot. The shadow's slow crawl tells him when the infusion is ready, sometimes a few hours, sometimes nearly a day. There's a curious, almost humorous tradition that Anpu shares. When treating insomnia, some healers would prescribe a concoction of herbs prepared exactly as the shadow reached the patient's doorstep at sunset. The idea was that the medicine and the shadow's arrival were in perfect harmony, lulling the patient into rest. Historians debate how widely these shadow-based medical timings were used. Some suggest they were limited to elite priests and physicians, while others argue they were common knowledge among village healers. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in between. Anpu's workshop is also filled with small carved amulets, each representing a different god or protective spirit. He tells you these amulets were sometimes worn or placed in direct sunlight to charge during specific shadow moments, believed to enhance their healing power. As the sun climbs higher, Anpu pauses to check the shadow stick. The shadow's length has passed the halfway mark, signaling it's time to prepare the next batch of remedies. He moves with practiced grace, carefully measuring and mixing. You try your hand at mixing a simple poultice, guided by Anpu's patient instructions. The earthy scent of herbs and the warm sunlight combine to create a strangely comforting atmosphere. Later, Anpu points out that some remedies involved watching animal shadows, such as those cast by cats or ibises, to determine the best times for treatment. This blending of shadow observation with natural behaviors adds another layer of complexity to ancient Egyptian medicine. As the day winds down, you step outside to feel the cooling air. The shadow stick's silhouette lengthens dramatically, stretching lazily across the courtyard stones. You realize that in this world, healing is not just about herbs and potions, but about understanding the quiet, slow dance of light and shadow. You settle down beside the stick, feeling the calm that comes from syncing your rhythm with the sun's ancient track. The sun rises gently today, casting a mellow glow over the courtyard where your faithful shadow stick awaits. The soft, steady light invites you into another chapter of the ancient Egyptian story, a chapter about travel, trade, and how shadows helped navigate the vast and winding Nile. Your companion for the day is a boatman named Seti, whose weathered hands and sun-kissed skin tell tales of countless journeys across the river's shimmering surface. Seti's craft is a simple felucca, its sail patched and faded but steady as ever. As you push off from the riverbank, the early morning light throws your shadow sharply onto the deck, a slender, constant companion that mirrors the slow rhythm of the boat's drift. Seti explains that before the invention of clocks, boatmen like him relied heavily on the sun and shadows to judge when to rest, when to sail faster, or when to dock. He points to a small wooden stake fixed near the helm, similar to the shadow sticks you've seen on land. This tells me how far the sun's climbed, which helps me estimate how long I've been on the water, Seti says. The Nile's moods change with the day, and so do I. You learn that during the New Kingdom period, river travel was central to commerce and communication. Merchants and travelers used sundials and shadow markers not only for timekeeping, but also to coordinate with market schedules in distant cities like Thebes and Memphis. SETI tells a curious story about how some river pilots would use floating shadow markers, small pieces of wood tethered to boats, to track the sun's position while sailing in the narrow river channels. It's a clever trick that blends natural observation with simple technology. Historians debate whether these floating markers were widespread or limited to particular regions, but you get the sense that ingenuity in shadow timekeeping was as varied as the Nile's many bends. As the sun climbs higher, you watch the water sparkle with light, creating shifting patterns of shadow and reflection. SETI navigates through reeds and sandbars, his eyes flicking between the sun, his shadow stick, and the distant shoreline. You ask about how the boatmen dealt with cloudy days. SETI shrugs, smiling wryly. We rely on stories and experience then. Shadows might hide, but the river never lies. The afternoon fades into a golden glow as you dock at a bustling riverside market. The sun's shadow falls long and soft over crates of spices, bundles of papyrus, and baskets of figs. Merchants shout and haggle, each likely keeping their own shadow time in mind for opening and closing stalls. Before leaving, SETI presses a small carved wooden amulet into your hand, shaped like a tiny felucca. For safe travels, he says, and to remember the sun's guide. You step back into the fading light, your own shadow stretching alongside the stick in your courtyard. The river's slow rhythm feels alive in your bones, a reminder that time is never just measured, it's lived. The morning sun creeps gently over the horizon, casting a calm golden light across your familiar courtyard. Your shadow stick stands, ready, its slender form beginning to stretch as the sun ascends, inviting you into another quiet exploration of ancient Egyptian life. Today you find yourself immersed in the rhythms of domestic life, where shadows helped shape the everyday routines of families and households. Your guide is a woman named Neferu, whose warm smile and gentle manner welcome you into her simple, sunlit home. Neferu shows you how the placement of shadow sticks within courtyards and gardens was not only for telling time, but also for managing daily tasks such as cooking, cleaning, and caring for children. She points out a shadow stick positioned near the oven, explaining how its shifting shadow helped determine when the bread was perfectly baked, neither too raw nor too hard. You notice the subtle interplay of light and shadow on the walls, where time was also measured by the lengthening and shortening of shadows cast by household objects throughout the day. This natural clock dictated everything from when to gather water to when to rest in the shade. Neferu shares a charming tradition from her village. During certain times of the year, shadow sticks were decorated with colorful beads and ribbons, making the slow passage of time a quiet celebration of life and nature's cycles. Historians still debate the extent to which such decorative shadow sticks were widespread or mostly symbolic within particular communities. Some believe they served as educational tools for children learning to read time, while others see them as cultural artifacts, linking timekeeping with seasonal festivals. As you help Neferu prepare a simple meal, you notice how the shifting shadows play across the woven baskets and earthenware pots, guiding the timing of each step, from soaking grains to simmering stews. She recounts a playful superstition that the shadow of a cat crossing the kitchen at certain hours could bring good luck and ensure a hearty meal. Maybe that's why cats are so beloved here. She laughs softly. The slow, measured pace of domestic life, marked by shadows and sunlight, feels like a soothing rhythm. You realize how intimately the ancient Egyptians wove their lives into the natural world, following the sun's gentle arc with quiet patience. As the sun dips lower, you settle beside the shadow stick, letting the peaceful rhythm of light and dark wash over you. The courtyard feels like a sanctuary, where time moves with ease, inviting you to breathe, relax, and simply be. The day's light fades softly, casting long, gentle shadows across the courtyard as you stand beside your familiar shadow stick. The warm glow feels like a quiet invitation to slow down, to listen to stories carried on the fading sunbeams. Today, your guide is a scribe named Khufu, who holds the delicate balance between record-keeping and the poetic rhythms of time. He explains how shadows were essential, not only for marking hours, but also for organizing the work of scribes who recorded everything from grain inventories to temple ceremonies. Khufu's workspace is a cool, shaded room filled with papyrus scrolls and reed pens. He shows you how scribes used shadow measurements to set their work schedule, ensuring they completed daily tasks before the sun's heat became too oppressive. He pulls out a small wooden sundial, a kind of portable shadow stick, explaining how it helped scribes working in different parts of Egypt coordinate timing. This was crucial during harvest seasons or large temple festivals, when precision was needed to manage labor and resources. You learn that shadow-based timing also played a role in the ancient Egyptian calendar, which combined solar observations with lunar cycles to keep time aligned with agricultural needs. This system was remarkably accurate for its time and deeply connected to the rhythms of daily life. Khufu shares a curious tidbit. Some scribes believed that shadows could hold a person's ka, or life force, and therefore they were careful when marking shadow times, treating them almost as sacred moments. Historians debate whether this belief influenced practical timekeeping or was simply a poetic interpretation of shadow's significance. Either way, it adds a layer of mystery to the everyday work of those who shaped history with ink and light. As the afternoon light softens, Khufu reads aloud a poetic passage describing the sun's journey and the shadows it casts, words that seem to breathe life into the slow passage of time. You feel the calm certainty of this measured existence, where shadows guide hands that write, count, and remember. It's a gentle reminder that timekeeping, even in ancient times, was as much an art as it was a science. As the sun sets, you watch your shadow stick's silhouette grow longer, the soft light inviting you to rest and dream, knowing that these slow moments are part of an unbroken chain stretching back thousands of years. The sun hangs low now, its warm light filtering softly through the date palms as you stand beside your ever-faithful shadow stick. The courtyard feels calm, wrapped in the gentle hush that comes as day drifts toward night. Today, you're introduced to the fascinating world of ancient Egyptian festivals and how shadows helped mark the timing of celebrations that blended community, religion, and the rhythms of the natural world. Your companion is a cheerful young priest named Senu, who delights in sharing stories that make the past feel alive and slightly mischievous. Senu leads you through the preparations for the Feast of the Valley, a festival honoring the dead and celebrating the river's life-giving powers. He explains how shadow sticks were essential for timing processions and rituals, ensuring that offerings reached the tombs precisely as the sun's shadow reached specific markers in the temples. Yue, picture the slow-moving crowds, cloaked in light linen, their shadows mingling with the flickering flames of oil lamps and incense burners. The procession's rhythm was carefully choreographed to match the sun's steady path, an elegant dance of light, shadow, and devotion. Senu shares a curious detail. During some festivals, priests would wear specially designed headdresses that cast elaborate shadows, creating symbolic shapes on temple walls. It was both a sacred display and an ancient form of shadow puppetry meant to evoke divine presence. Historians continue to debate how much of these shadow performances were planned theatrics versus spontaneous spiritual expressions. Regardless, the effect must have been mesmerizing. Imagine flickering gods and animals dancing on ancient stone. As the festival day unfolds, you feel the steady pulse of time measured not by noisy clocks, but by the slow, deliberate shift of shadows cast, by pillars, statues, and altars. The air is filled with the soft murmur of prayers and the rustle of fabric, the entire scene bathed in golden light. Later, Senu points out a small shadow stick carved with symbols representing different deities, used to help schedule rituals dedicated to each god throughout the year. It's a reminder that time in ancient Egypt was deeply spiritual, woven into the fabric of daily life. As twilight deepens, you find yourself standing quietly beside the shadow stick, feeling the gentle pulse of centuries past. The shadows lengthen, embracing the courtyard with a peaceful hush, inviting you to rest and drift gently towards sleep. The last light of day lingers softly over your courtyard, where your shadow stick stands silhouetted against the cooling stones. The air is filled with the comforting sounds of evening, distant birdsong, the gentle rustle of palm leaves, and the quiet settling of a world preparing for rest. Tonight, you join an elder named Amunet, whose voice carries the wisdom of many seasons. She guides you through the final reflections on how shadows were not just tools, but companions, silent witnesses to the slow, steady passage of time in ancient Egypt. Amunet speaks softly about the legacy of shadow timekeeping, how these humble sticks and their slow-moving silhouettes helped structure everything from daily chores to grand ceremonies, weaving human lives into the sun's eternal cycle. You imagine the countless hands that held similar sticks, the eyes that watched shadows inch forward in the quiet morning, the evenings marked by lengthening shapes and cooling light. This shared experience connects you across millennia. There's a gentle humor in Amunet's stories, like the tale of a pharaoh who supposedly had a shadow stick too short for his grand palace, causing his courtiers to invent clever ways to lengthen shadows with mirrors and polished bronze. Historians still debate whether this story is fact or friendly folklore, but it captures the spirit of how seriously, and sometimes playfully, ancient Egyptians regarded their shadow companions. As darkness deepens, Amunet encourages you to feel gratitude for these slow moments of light and shade, for the rhythms that guided a civilization and now invite you to slow down too. You close your eyes briefly, breathing in the soft night air, feeling a profound calm. The shadow stick stands quietly beside you, a gentle reminder that time, like shadows, moves steadily, patiently, always leading you toward rest. Now, as the night settles softly around you, imagine the quiet journey your shadow stick has taken, measuring the gentle dance of sunlight across ancient courtyards and timeless skies. There's a softness in the way time moves here, slow and steady like the river's flow, inviting your mind to drift and your body to relax. Feel the warmth of the fading sun on your skin, the subtle shift of light to dark, as if the world itself is whispering a lullaby just for you. Breathe deeply and let the stillness wrap around you like a soft blanket, safe and calm. In this peaceful space, the concerns of the day seem distant, replaced by the quiet rhythm of shadows stretching and shrinking, a natural pulse that has guided countless souls before you. Your breath slows, your muscles release tension, and the steady, gentle presence of the sun's path becomes a comforting companion. Allow your thoughts to float gently, like leaves drifting on a calm stream, as you sink deeper into this moment of calm. The shadows lengthen, blending softly with the night's embrace, and you feel a serene connection to the endless cycles of day and night. Here in the quiet company of light and shadow, you are exactly where you need to be, held by time's gentle hand, ready to rest. May your dreams carry you softly through the night, guided by the same slow, steady rhythms that once measured the days of ancient Egypt. Sleep well, knowing the shadows will be here when you wake, patiently waiting to begin the journey once more.